Hello, my name is Ia Yin, and I'm a registered clinical counselor based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. No matter who you are or where you are in the world, at some point in your lifetime, you will experience grief. Grief and loss are part of life, but fortunately, there are ways to handle it in healthy and constructive ways. The first thing to do when one is entering into grief is to prepare yourself and understand the stages of grief. The visual diagram that I have created is called the grief healing process. The 7 stages that I have identified is based upon the grief model by psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The emotions within grief is more than just sadness and includes the ebbs and flows of a diverse range of emotions, physical and mental reactions, behavioral changes, and transformation in one's outlook on life. From a culturally sensitive perspective, it's important that you come into awareness of your cross-cultural values, your support system, your defense mechanisms, your coping mechanisms, your pre-existing vulnerability factors in physical and mental health. By taking the time to identify and grow self-awareness in these areas, it'll help you proactively prepare for the stages of grief ahead. Remember, everyone grieves at different rates and different pace of life. Delayed grief can occur when people suppress the emotions of death and/or loss years later, and then find themselves surprised when they go into a dip in depression. As I mentioned before, keep track of your cultural unique scope in life, your age, your gender, your race, your personality, your support network. These factors all play a part in our journey in grief. Stage 1, denial. In this stage, one can experience shock, unbelief, and move into sensations of numbness, isolation. Some people may even disassociate from reality, wanting so bad to suppress or not feel, therefore shutting down all emotions. Now, whether you are someone that is experiencing the first stage of shock and denial, or someone that is caretaking and supporting someone in this first stage, it's important not to put a label or criticize the fact that they're using this defense mechanism in order to cope. When one enters the initial stage of shock and crisis, oftentimes the executive functioning aspects of our brain literally shuts down, which makes thinking, feeling, doing much more harder than if you were just in a normal state. The second stage of grief is anger. In here, you can expect to feel frustration, easily irritability, anxiety, verbal or even physical arousal of aggression, either directed at a person or at an object, in which you may feel intense, distressing emotions of anger or rage or even hatred that needs to be somehow expelled out of you. Self-awareness is really critical for stage 2 anger, because if one can manage their anger in a way that is healthy, such as going for runs to expel that intense energy, then they can manage to be able to still hold healthy relationships. Unfortunately, when one is not aware of their anger, they may vicariously begin to harm others by using others as a punching bag, or worse yet, begin to also self-harm. The third stage of grief is bargaining. In this stage, people often experience long, deep ruminations of wanting to go back in time and wanting to create temporary truths or bargaining, making deals with either yourself, with others, or even with a higher power if you believe in God. So as one is ruminating in self-criticism and looking for ways and thinking about ways they could have done better, these negative internalized self-scripts then continue to fuel deep sense of guilt or shame. And the script within their mind is, if I could only have done more. Therefore, they may say a prayer, God, If I do this, will you then do that? In the bargaining stage, it's common to see that people are working extra hard to overcompensate and slave drive themselves into the fourth stage of grief is depression.
Doing more.
It is a time in which people feel powerless, feel confused and overwhelmed. Often they feel flat or hopeless, stuck in sadness and stressful or even traumatic memories of the past. This is a time in which they're still suppressing emotions and they're numbing, or they're oversleeping, or they're emotional eating, or in some cases, people cope by gaming or using other forms of escapism. In the stage of depression, if one didn't deal with their own anger earlier on in their grief, they will begin to feel the effects of the internalized anger, and that may show up in becoming more self-critical, more negative, more cynical, and as well, they may choose to be more stoic. As they ruminate in dark thoughts, this can lead to deeper degrees of vulnerability towards self-harm. In these stages of grief, there is no timeline between each stage. Each person either manages or chooses to suppress and prolong stages. Oftentimes, people do begin to seek for help outside of themselves when they have overexhausted themselves through the denial, anger, and bargaining stage. In this stage of depression, it's important as a friend, family, or support worker to come alongside and really acknowledge the loss for that person grieving. They may be thinking, indeed, what is the point to life? And unable to let go of their loved ones that had passed, of broken, unfulfilled dreams. The fifth stage of grief is acceptance of reality. This is the time in which people are beginning to sense that they're willing to let go of their broken dreams. This is a time in which they've acknowledged their powerlessness to things that they cannot change. This is a time in which they begin to reimagine new options. A person who is healthy and is beginning to discover energy back can begin to use coping strategies to gain support. They can also begin to renegotiate and adjust their identity and deepen in self-awareness. So, for example, a woman that has lost her husband and now is a widow now must adjust to the identity of what it means to be a widow, to be single again, and yet supported in a community of family and friends. Moving from a place of depression and feeling stuck or unwilling to let go of unfulfilled dreams, this is the stage in which a person can do perspective taking and begin to explore being flexible. This is a stage in which people can choose to conjure up courage once again, to hope, to be motivated to adapt, and to learn new ways of living this life, imperfect to what they expected life to be. The spirit and attitude of a person in this stage is one of surrender, and one may say to themselves, okay, now I'm finally ready to let go and begin again. The sixth stage of grief is readjustment phase. So here in this phase, you may see that a person is building new goals, new values, and beginning to get more energy, so they're increasing in their social interactions. They've accepted the loss and are taking healthy risks forward. That could mean risks in career change. That could mean a risk in being much more vulnerable, emotionally sharing and reflecting about the loss. So whereas in stage 5, it's more of a phase related internally, stage 6 is really much more about practical shifts into reorganizing life and problem solving. Signs of a healthy person entering into emotional regulation and readjustment is someone who feels motivation resurging and they're proactively building up their life to manage the difficulties in life, to create new opportunities, to understand their limits, to protect their boundaries, and acknowledge the permanent change, even if it's not pleasant, and there is need to adjust the plans to suit the change even more. And the final stage of this grief healing process is the renewal stage. It is the stage that everyone wants to shortcut to, and unfortunately, very rare can this ever happen. This is a time in which, when people have done the inner work, they're now entering into new levels of courage, new levels of energy to then engage in their new plans, to really enter into the goals that they now see with their mind's eye. They have a sense of regained hope, and the roots of that hope is a resilient one in which it's rooted in joy, rooted in deep values that they've reconciled with in life. It's a time of restored dignity, of self-regard, of coming into knowing what you are capable of and celebrating the fact that you survived all the stages of grief and all the turmoil that was something that you never had ever imagined or planned for. This is a time also in which people connect and feel belonging in the community. And with the resurgence of energy and motivation and hope, this is a time often when someone then gives back to the community. They're walking forward not just for their own sake, but coming into the awareness that, wow, knowing what I know, I want to also contribute to support others. So in this stage, the spirit and the posture of the heart is a one of delight and one of curiosity, looking across the horizon and asking, what shall I do next? Even with hope and vitality, this is also a phase in which individuals are testing this new reality. Indeed, they've grieved through something that forevermore has changed their perception of life. And so this is a season in which people are working with new ideas, new scenarios of how they're adjusting and working with the plans that they've set. In the stage of renewal and testing, there will be times in which people can go into dips of depression or loss again. In both the stages of acceptance and renewal, a person is really testing their new concept of life. And so the emphasis that often you will hear from therapists is to enter into radical acceptance. Indeed, as life moves on, changes that unfold may be positive and may be negative. The new energy one puts in the renewal stage may have good results, may not come into fruition. So in this final stage of healing and recovery, it's so important to come into a place of joining with others and having the community or the people that you love continue to reinforce support and continue to encourage you of the goals and vision and values that you have set and centered yourself in, regardless of the results. And also to continue to exercise self-compassion, self-kindness, and most importantly, patience. Thank you so much for taking the time to activate your self-awareness through the stages of grief. Remember, not all people experience all the stages of grief. And what I share with you as this free resource gives you an idea of the common emotional phases and seasons of change through grief. And if you are someone that is facing a crisis, may this resource help you recognize where you are at currently in your healing journey and what to anticipate moving forward. Now, if a stage, for example, the depression stage, lasts too long and you're sensing desperation and perhaps deep sense of despair, remember, please, that there are professionals that are ready and willing to help you process your grief. Thank you, everyone, and please feel free to share this resource to anyone that you feel would benefit from my video. Behold, become the law.